They called my son useless, but they hadn't seen what I had. The late afternoon sun, already beginning its descent, slanted through the tall, arched windows of the reception hall, casting long, dancing shadows across the polished marble floor. It was a beautiful venue, chosen by my sister-in-law, Clara, for its old-world charm, the kind of place with soaring ceilings, ornate plasterwork, and crystal chandeliers that flickered with a warm, inviting light. The one nearest the grand staircase seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible irregularity that caught my eye. White folding chairs, arranged in neat rows for the ceremony earlier, were now being discreetly whisked away by uniformed staff, making space for the evening's festivities. The air hummed with a nervous energy, a cocktail of expensive perfume, champagne, and the low murmur of 100 conversations. Guests, dressed in their finest silks and tailored suits, mingled, their laughter a little too bright, their smiles a little too fixed. Family weddings. Always a minefield. My son, Leo, all of 11 years old but appearing younger in his slightly rumpled navy blazer and trousers I'd painstakingly pressed that morning, hovered near the coat rack, a shadowed alcove just beyond the main swirl of activity. He wasn't hiding, not exactly, but he was certainly seeking refuge. His fingers, small and deft, worried the edge of a worn paperback he'd insisted on bringing, its cover depicting some fantastical spaceship navigating an asteroid field. The cacophony of the crowd, the sheer volume of social expectation, was, I knew, like a physical weight on his sensitive spirit. The other children his age, cousins mostly, were already a boisterous pack, chasing each other across a far corner of the room, their shrieks and giggles momentarily drowning out the string quartet setting up near the hastily erected dance floor. Leo wouldn't join them. He never did. It wasn't that he disliked them. It was more that their energy, their effortless, unthinking social navigation, was a language he hadn't quite mastered, or perhaps didn't care to. Honestly, Sarah, he's just useless at things like this. A voice, familiar and sharp, cut through the general din. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood not 10 feet away, her back mostly to me, addressing her sister, Aunt Mildred. Eleanor's silver-gray hair was sculpted into an immovable helmet, her posture ramrod straight, her voice carrying with an effortless authority that always made me feel like a scolded schoolgirl. She gestured vaguely in Leo's direction with a perfectly manicured hand, a diamond bracelet catching the light. Look at him. Miles away. You'd think he'd at least try to engage. David's boys are already making friends, running about. Healthy. The word healthy landed like a stone in my stomach. I bit the inside of my cheek, the familiar metallic taste of small, sharp pain that grounded me. Again, that word, that comparison. I had fought this battle on so many fronts for so many years, in quiet conversations that escalated into strained silences, in pediatricians' offices where I sought reassurance, in tearful late-night talks with my husband, Mark, who loved his son fiercely but often felt bewildered by Eleanor's relentless critiques. I tried to build a fortress around Leo's spirit, brick by patient brick, to shield him from the casual cruelty of being labeled, misunderstood. But days like this, public and performative, felt like sieges, where the walls threatened to crumble. I saw Leo flinch, almost imperceptibly. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the comment, but his shoulders hunched a fraction more, his head dipped lower over his book. He'd heard. Of course, he'd heard. He heard everything, saw everything. His quietness was not emptiness. It was a space filled with observation, with a deep, sometimes overwhelming, processing of the world around him. A wave of protectiveness, fierce and hot, washed over me. I wanted to stride over to Eleanor, to tell her, finally, about the Leo she refused to see. The Leo who, just last winter, when the ancient boiler in our house had sputtered its last breath on the coldest night of the year, had been the one to figure out the pilot light sequence. Mark and I had been frantic, shivering, calling emergency plumbers who wouldn't come out until morning. Leo, wrapped in a blanket, his nose red with cold, had retrieved the crumpled, grease-stained manual from the back of the airing cupboard. He'd sat on the cold kitchen floor, flashlight in hand, tracing diagrams with a small finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. I think, he'd said softly, after nearly an hour of intense study, his voice barely a whisper, "It's this valve, Mama. It needs to be turned very slowly, then you push the igniter, here." And he'd been right. The whoosh of the flame catching, the blessed wave of warmth that had eventually spread through the house. That was Leo. Not useless. Essential. But how could I explain that here? In this glittering hall, against the backdrop of clinking glasses and social maneuvering, Eleanor wouldn't understand. To her, success was loud, visible, conventional. It was good grades in traditional subjects, athletic prowess, a robust social life. Leo's talents were quieter, more intricate, often invisible to the undiscerning eye. I took a slow, calming breath, the scent of lilies from a nearby floral arrangement almost cloying. I wouldn't engage. Not now. It would only create a scene, draw more unwanted attention to Leo, make him shrink further. Instead, I walked towards him, my heels clicking softly on the marble, a deliberate counterpoint to the anxious thumping of my own heart. He looked up as I approached, his eyes, a deep, thoughtful gray, meeting mine. There was a question in them, a flicker of the hurt he tried so hard to conceal. I offered him a small, reassuring smile. "Hey, sweetie. You okay over here?" He nodded, tucking the book into his blazer pocket. "It's a bit loud," he said, his voice low. "And that light," he gestured subtly with his chin towards the flickering chandelier. "It's going to burn out soon, I think. Or maybe it's a loose wire in the fitting." I glanced at it. I'd noticed its erratic pulse, but dismissed it. Leo hadn't. "You think so?" "It's not a steady flicker," he explained, his gaze analytical. "It's more like a stutter. Like the power isn't connecting right." This was Leo. While others saw a grand, festive room, he saw the mechanics beneath, the subtle signs of systems under stress. He'd always been like that. When he was barely old enough to walk, he wasn't interested in stacking blocks. He was fascinated by how the hinges on the toy box worked, how the remote control's battery cover clicked into place. Broken things called to him, not as sources of frustration, but as puzzles waiting to be solved. I remembered him at 5, sitting for hours with a broken music box my own mother had given me. It had been silent for years. We'd all assumed it was beyond repair. Leo, with his small screwdrivers purloined from Mark's toolbox, had patiently, meticulously, taken it apart, cleaned the delicate workings with a cotton swab, and, to our astonishment, put it back together. The faint, tinny melody of Claire de Lune that had finally emerged had sounded like a miracle. Mark had been stunned. How did he do that?" He'd whispered. I just hugged Leo, my heart swelling. "He just sees things differently, Mark." Eleanor's voice drifted over again, this time in a conspiratorial murmur to another cousin, James, a successful, if rather smug, solicitor. "Claire has spent a fortune on this DJ, you know. Top of the line. Let's hope everything goes smoothly. You can't have a wedding without good music, can you?" She cast another pointed look towards Leo, then back at James's 2 boisterous children, who were now attempting to slide across the polished floor in their party shoes. The implication was clear. Some children were an asset, others a liability. The knot in my stomach tightened. The judgment wasn't just about Leo's quietness. It was a pervasive dismissal of anything that didn't fit Eleanor's narrow definition of value. It extended to Mark's career choice, a teacher, not a high-powered executive like her other son-in-law, to my own decision to work part-time so I could be more present for Leo. It was a constant, subtle erosion. The string quartet finished their set with a flourish, and a polite smattering of applause rippled through the room. A young man with brightly colored hair and multiple piercings was now checking microphones at a sleek, modern DJ booth set up near the dance floor. He looked competent, professional. Cables snaked across the floor, taped down with bright yellow gaffer tape, but one thick black one, presumably a main power line, ran from a wall socket near the grand staircase, past the alcove where Leo and I stood, towards the booth. Leo's gaze followed it. He tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. He wasn't just idly looking. He was tracing its path, his eyes noting the connections, the way it lay against the skirting board. He even took a small, almost hesitant step closer, bending down slightly as if to examine where it plugged into a large, multi-socket extension block near the wall. He didn't touch anything, just observed. It was the same look of quiet intensity he'd had when diagnosing the boiler or reassembling the music box. "What do you see, love?" I asked softly, careful not to break his concentration. He straightened up, his brow still furrowed. "That main plug, it looks a bit loose in the socket. And the cable is pulled really tight around the corner of that little table someone's put there." He pointed to a small, antique console table laden with a guest book and a vase of flowers, positioned awkwardly near the power outlet. If someone bumps the table, it could pull the plug out more. Or damage the cable. I looked. He was right. The cable was stretched taut, angling sharply around the table leg. The plug itself did seem to be sitting a little proud of the socket. A small detail easily overlooked in the grand scheme of the wedding preparations. A detail Leo had noticed. Maybe you should tell someone? I suggested, though a part of me dreaded the inevitable dismissal he might receive from a busy technician or, worse, from one of the family. Leo shook his head, a familiar reticence settling over him. They're busy, he murmured, glancing towards the DJ, who was now conferring with Clara, the bride, her face alight with excitement. It's probably fine. But I saw the faint unease in his eyes. He knew it wasn't probably fine. He understood, in a way few adults here did, the fragility of systems, the way small stresses could lead to bigger failures. The guests were beginning to take their seats at the round tables, each adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces and flickering tea lights. The lights in the room dimmed slightly, a signal that the formal part of the reception was about to begin. The chandeliers, including the one Leo had pointed out, cast a softer, more intimate glow, though its stuttering pulse seemed, if anything, more pronounced in the lower light. A low thrum of music started from the DJ booth, smooth jazz, setting a sophisticated mood. Eleanor, now seated at the head table alongside Clara's parents and the groom's family, caught my eye. She gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, then turned to say something to her husband, Frank, who nodded absently, his attention on the wine list. The scrutiny, even from across the room, felt palpable. I thought of another time, a smaller incident, but one that had cemented Eleanor's opinion of Leo. It was at a family barbecue a few years ago. Her prized rose bushes, a source of immense pride, had been wilting despite regular watering. Various family members had offered opinions: too much sun, not enough fertilizer, the wrong kind of soil. Leo, then about 8, had been quietly watching a line of ants marching near the base of one particularly afflicted bush. He'd knelt, oblivious to the adult conversation, and gently brushed away some soil. "Grandma," he'd said, his voice barely audible, "I think these little black bugs are eating the roots." He'd pointed to a cluster of aphids, almost invisible to the naked eye. Eleanor had waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be silly, Leo. It's the heat." He wouldn't know anything about gardening. She then launched into a lengthy anecdote about a prize-winning rose from her youth. Later, when the gardener she'd eventually called confirmed a severe aphid infestation at the roots, she'd never acknowledged Leo's observation. It was simply forgotten, or rather, ignored. His quiet insight, his unique way of seeing, was not a currency she valued. The master of ceremonies, a jovial friend of the groom, approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, if I could have your attention, please." His voice boomed through the speakers, clear and strong. "It's time for our happy couple, Clara and Ben, to take to the floor for their first dance as husband and wife." A wave of applause, warm and genuine this time. Clara, radiant in her ivory gown, looked at her new husband, her eyes shining. Ben, looking a little overwhelmed but undeniably happy, offered her his hand. They moved towards the center of the dance floor. The DJ, cued by the MC, faded out the jazz and a hush fell over the room. This was the moment. The romantic ballad they'd chosen, a song I knew Clara had agonized over for weeks, was about to begin. The DJ pressed a button on his console. Nothing. Just silence. A heavy, expectant silence. He pressed it again. Still nothing. A frown creased his brightly haired brow. He tapped a fader, checked a connection on his laptop. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Just a little technical hitch, folks," the MC announced, his jovial tone strained. "Don't worry, we'll have it sorted in a jiffy." Clara's smile faltered. Ben squeezed her hand reassuringly. Guests began to murmur. I saw Eleanor lean forward, her expression one of dawning irritation. The DJ was now looking frantic, rebooting his laptop, jiggling wires at the back of his mixer. He muttered something to himself, then spoke into the microphone, his voice tinny and weak without the main speakers. "Sorry, folks. Seem to be having a problem with the sound system. Just bear with me." Leo, beside me, was bolt upright, his earlier reticence gone. His eyes were fixed on the DJ booth, then darted to the main power cable he'd pointed out earlier, then to the stuttering chandelier. He was connecting dots, I knew it. "Mama," he whispered, his voice urgent, "I think it's the main power. Not just the speakers." As if on cue, the stuttering chandelier gave one final, convulsive flicker, and then, with a soft, almost apologetic sigh, went out. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the grand reception hall was plunged into a disorienting gloom, punctuated only by the emergency exit signs glowing a dim green and the tiny, inadequate flames of the tea lights on the tables. A collective gasp went through the room. Panic, soft at first, then rising in pitch, began to ripple outwards. Someone shrieked as they stumbled in the near darkness. The click-clack of heels on marble sounded unnervingly loud as people started to move, to get up, unsure what to do. "Stay calm, everyone." The MC's voice, now unamplified and strained, tried to cut through the rising tide of anxiety. "It's just a power blip. I'm sure it'll come back on any second." But it didn't. The darkness felt absolute, oppressive. The scent of lilies and expensive perfume was now mixed with a faint, acrid smell, like ozone or burning dust, that prickled at my nostrils. "Mark," I called out, trying to locate my husband in the gloom. "Sarah, I'm here. Don't move." His voice came from a nearby table. Clara, I could just make her out, a pale silhouette in her white dress, was clinging to Ben. Her dream moment, ruined. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, quickly followed by a surge of my own anxiety. Then, through the confusion, the murmurs of fear, the shuffling of unseen bodies, I saw a small, determined shadow detach itself from my side. Leo. He moved with a quiet purposefulness I'd rarely seen from him in public. He wasn't heading towards the DJ, or the MC, or any of the flustered-looking venue staff who were now fumbling for flashlights. He was heading straight for that shadowed alcove near the grand staircase, towards the wall socket and the awkwardly positioned console table. "Leo," I whispered into the darkness, a tremor of fear in my voice. "What was he doing?" He didn't answer. I saw him kneel, a small, dark shape against the slightly less dark wall. He was feeling for something, his hands moving with that same careful, diagnostic precision I'd seen him use on the music box, on the boiler. Someone bumped into the console table. There was a dull thud, a faint tinkle of glass. Perhaps the guest book or the flower vase had wobbled. "Careful," a voice snapped. "I can't see a thing," another complained. I held my breath. The venue manager, a stout man with a red face, finally appeared with a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a swathe through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He was barking orders at his staff, his voice tight with stress. "Check the main breaker. Someone get candles. Call the emergency electrician." No one was paying any attention to the small boy kneeling by the wall. Except me. I could just make out his silhouette in the dim, reflected light from the manager's torch. He was bent over, his head close to the floor. He seemed to be focused on the very spot he'd pointed out to me earlier, the plug, the taut cable, the extension block. I saw him reach out, his small hand disappearing into the tangle of wires near the skirting board. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if he got a shock? What if he made it worse? This wasn't a broken toy. This was a venue's entire electrical system, or at least a crucial part of it. The air was thick with tension, with the sound of hushed, anxious conversations, with the shuffling of feet. I could hear Eleanor's voice, sharp and querulous, demanding to know what was happening. "This is outrageous. For what Clara paid for this place." Then Leo shifted. He sat back on his heels for a moment, as if considering. The manager's flashlight beam swept past him, missing him entirely as it focused on a frantic-looking staff member trying to open a panel in the wall, presumably looking for a fuse box. Leo leaned forward again. This time, there was a faint but distinct click. A solid, reassuring sound, like a switch being firmly engaged, or a plug being properly seated. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The darkness remained. The anxiety in the room was a living thing, coiling tighter and tighter. I felt the despair begin to settle in my chest. It was too much to hope for. And then, the chandelier directly above the dance floor flickered once, twice, and blazed into full, brilliant life. A collective sigh of relief, almost a cheer, swept through the room. Another bank of lights came on, then another. The wall sconces glowed. The DJ's console lit up like a Christmas tree, a low hum emanating from the previously silent speakers. Within seconds, the reception hall was bathed once more in warm, welcoming light. The oppressive gloom vanished as if it had never been. The sudden return of light was almost as disorienting as its loss. People blinked, looking around, their faces a mixture of relief and bewilderment. The DJ, who had been slumped over his console in despair, straightened up, his eyes wide. He tentatively touched a control. Music, clear and vibrant, the opening bars of Clara and Ben's chosen ballad, swelled through the room. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief, of joy. Ben pulled her close, his own face a mask of astonishment. The MC, momentarily speechless, quickly recovered. "Well, folks," he boomed, his voice full and resonant once more. "Looks like we're back in business. Let's give a huge round of applause for, the quick-thinking venue staff." A wave of enthusiastic applause erupted. The venue manager, looking immensely relieved but also rather puzzled, puffed out his chest slightly, accepting the credit. His staff members exchanged confused glances. They hadn't done anything. They were still fumbling with the panel in the wall. My gaze, however, was fixed on the alcove by the staircase. Leo was slowly getting to his feet, brushing dust from the knees of his trousers. He looked small, almost insignificant, in the returning clamor of the celebration. He wasn't looking for praise, for acknowledgement. He was simply retreating, melting back towards the coat rack, his mission accomplished. But I had seen, and I knew. I pushed my way through the suddenly re-energized crowd, my heart overflowing with a feeling so immense, so powerful, it almost choked me. Pride, yes, but also a profound sense of vindication, a quiet, fierce joy. I reached him just as he was picking up his discarded paperback. "Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He looked up, his gray eyes calm, a little shy. "The main plug for the DJ's power strip was halfway out, Mama," he explained softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "And the cable was bent really sharply where the table leg was pressing it. I think when someone bumped the table, it pulled the plug out just enough to cut the power to that whole circuit. The lights on that side of the room must be on the same one." He paused. "I just pushed the plug back improperly. And I moved the cable a bit, so it's not squashed." He made it sound so simple. And perhaps it was. A simple solution that had eluded all the panicked, capable adults. A solution seen and enacted by the boy they called useless. Clara and Ben were now on the dance floor, finally having their first dance. The music soared, filling the room. Guests were smiling, tapping their feet. The crisis was over, averted. But something had shifted. The venue manager, his face still a little flushed, was now conferring with one of his staff near the power outlet. The staff member was pointing, shrugging. The manager looked down at the socket, then at the repositioned cable, a frown of dawning comprehension on his face. He looked around, as if searching for someone. His eyes scanned the room, passed over Leo without recognition, and then moved on. But then Clara, mid-twirl with Ben, caught my eye. She had seen me talking to Leo. She knew how he often hovered on the edges, how observant he was. Her gaze flickered to the alcove, then to Leo, then back to me, a question in her eyes. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her eyes widened. As the song ended, and before the applause could fully swell, she disengaged from Ben, picked up the microphone the MC had left on a nearby table, and tapped it. "Excuse me, everyone," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Thank you all for your patience. And thank you to the, person who so cleverly got our lights and music back on." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, and then it settled, unmistakably, on Leo, who froze, suddenly the center of attention he so diligently avoided. "I think," Clara continued, a warm smile spreading across her face, "we actually have a very special young man to thank. My nephew, Leo." A hush fell. All eyes turned to Leo. He looked like a startled deer, his face flushing a deep crimson. He shuffled his feet, his gaze fixed on the floor. Eleanor, at the head table, was staring, her mouth slightly agape. Her perfectly sculpted expression had, for the first time all evening, slipped. She looked stunned, utterly stunned. Frank, beside her, was looking at Leo with a new, curious expression. "Leo," Clara said gently, her voice full of genuine gratitude. "Did you fix the power?" Leo managed a tiny nod, still not looking up. "Well," Clara beamed, "thank you. You saved our first dance. You saved the party." She began to clap, and Ben, smiling broadly, joined in. Then, hesitantly at first, but then with growing enthusiasm, the rest of the room erupted in applause. Not polite applause this time, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. It washed over Leo, who looked completely overwhelmed. I moved to his side, putting my arm around his trembling shoulders. He leaned into me, burying his face for a moment against my side. The venue manager was now staring at Leo with open astonishment. He approached us, his earlier bluster gone. Is that right, son?" he asked, his voice softer. "Did you fix that plug?" Leo nodded again, his voice muffled against my dress. It was loose. The manager shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be. All my guys were running around like headless chickens looking for a tripped main breaker, and this young man, He just saw the problem. He extended a hand towards Leo. Thank you, son. You've got a good head on your shoulders. A very good head. Leo, hesitantly, shook the offered hand. The attention was too much for him. As soon as the manager moved away to reassure other guests, Leo tugged on my hand. Can we just go back to the coats, Mama? I smiled, my heart aching with love for him. Of course, sweetie. We slipped away from the center of attention, back to the relative quiet of the alcove. He immediately retrieved his book, but he didn't open it. He just held it, his small shoulders slowly relaxing. The party resumed, the music lively, the laughter genuine now, the earlier tension dissipated. But the atmosphere was subtly different. People were glancing towards Leo, murmuring. I saw a few of the cousins, the ones who usually ignored him or teased him for being quiet, looking at him with a new respect, a touch of awe. Eleanor didn't approach. She didn't offer an apology or even a direct word of praise. I hadn't expected her to. That wasn't her way. But as the evening wore on, I saw her watching Leo, not with criticism or dismissal, but with a strange, contemplative expression I had never seen on her face before. When he shyly accepted a piece of wedding cake from a passing waiter, her gaze softened, just for a moment. It wasn't a grand transformation, but it was a crack in the facade, a tiny fissure in the wall of her certainty. Perhaps, just perhaps, a seed of understanding had been planted. Later, as the dancing was in full swing, Mark found us. He knelt down in front of Leo, his face alight with a pride that mirrored my own. Leo, he said, his voice full of warmth. That was amazing. You were amazing. Leo looked up at his father, a small, shy smile finally touching his lips. It wasn't that hard, Dad. Maybe not for you, Mark said, ruffling his hair. But you saved the day, buddy. You really did. He pulled Leo into a fierce hug, and I blinked back tears, my own heart feeling impossibly full. As the night drew to a close, and we prepared to leave, Clara sought us out. She hugged Leo tightly. Thank you again, Leo, she whispered. You're my hero. She then looked at me, her eyes conveying a depth of understanding and gratitude that needed no words. Walking out into the cool night air, Leo holding my hand on one side, Mark's arm around my shoulder on the other, I felt a profound sense of peace, of quiet triumph. The world hadn't changed overnight. Eleanor would likely still find things to criticize. Leo would still be Leo, quiet, observant, sometimes overwhelmed. But something important had shifted in the way others saw him, and perhaps, even more importantly, in the way he might begin to see himself in these challenging social landscapes. He had stepped forward, not for glory, but because he saw a problem and knew how to fix it. And in doing so, he had shown them all. They called my son useless, but they'll never overlook him again.